Hi there. What do you do when you need to express something but you don't really have words to explain what you're trying to talk about? This is a rather common problem, and there are three simple solutions with different qualities and drawbacks. First of all, you can search for words and meanings that already exist. Second, you can expand existing words, giving them new meanings. And third, you can simply make up new words. In the novel 1984, George Orwell shows how society can keep people down by keeping them from having words to talk about their experiences. In reality, it's rarely that blunt, but the core problem is there. We need to expand our way of thinking and talking. We need to be able to express the things we have to express. Very often, there are already words available. We just don't know about them. We need to educate ourselves. But when that is not enough, we tend to expand on the words we already have, use them as much as we can. We tend to shy away from making up new words. And that's a good thing, because if we just make up new words all the time, willy-nilly, it's much more risk that we will talk past each other and having more and more words for the same thing. It just becomes bloated and very problematic. But we can't just stick to number two either. We can't just stick to using the same words in more and more ways. We need a balance between these three strategies. We need to combine them with each other. One of the main problems with the second strategy is the thing that I now call the Piñata Effect. This is when you just stuff a word with more and more meaning, ironically making the word meaningless in the process. It becomes harder to communicate about the word because it means so many different things at the same time, which invites equivocation, the idea that different things are the same thing because they have the same name. It just gets over bloated in that way. It stops communication and it stops thinking. But that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing in itself. You just need to stop it when it goes too far. Two words that made me think about this concept and name it the Piñata Effect. Well, one is racism and the other is cultural appropriation. When it comes to racism, well, I personally have a rather simple definition of racism. It is categorism focused on categorizing people by skin color or similar ethnicity, or if you want to call it race. But people tend to use the word racism as their word for categorism as such, and their word for apartheid as such. They do this because the words categorism and apartheid are not mainstream, even if they have even heard about these words. They don't trust that people will understand them when they use them. The word racism is so much simpler, but when we have the same word for prejudice, bigotry, and discrimination based on skin color, same word for the unfair systems in the world where people don't get to exercise the same rights depending on what nationality they are assigned to. Basic democratic rights, freedom of speech, and so on, all based on nationality. And the whole thing with prejudice, bigotry, and discrimination based on the categorization of people, when you simply have the same word for all these things, and some people on top of this, some people assume that it's all about individual psychology, while others assume that it's all about social structures. It becomes really problematic. It becomes really hard to have a discussion at all. This affects everybody, including me. After I finally found the concept of apartheid, I realized a gaping, glaring hole in my first master thesis, the one about categorism. I had not made a point of making a clear distinction between culture and national law and international law. I did mention the distinction between structural categorism in cultural stereotypes and so on, and categorism in what is actually legal and not. But that was just mentioned in passing. I should have brought it up as different levels of categorism. I mean, I have this whole thing with individual, group, system, structure, discourse, and dogma. I should have added national law and or local law and international law on top of the whole thing. But the main reason I didn't pay much attention to it was that I was stuck in this thinking that categorism based on skin color and categorism based on nationality is the same thing. I have used the word racism for these, even within the categories model, and this is what I've been taught all along, and this is how most people use the word. And that just doesn't work. We need to distinguish between skin color and nationality. Categories based on skin color, it's a big problem, but it's illegal in most countries. It is not encouraged by the law itself. While discrimination based on nationality, that is built into international law and the local laws of every country in the world. That's the world order we live in today. We live in a globalized society with global economy, global society, global politics. But the governance of this unified world is a part wealth, where some people get to vote, some people don't, and those people who get to vote, to what extent their vote even matters, depend on what country they get to vote in. And as a society, we generally don't even make a distinction. And this is one piñata we really need to smash. The other one, cultural appropriation. When I first encountered this concept, it was a clear-cut, simple concept, signifying a problem that wasn't complicated in itself. The cases could be complex, but the thing itself was really simple. I was working at Setara Institute for Democracy and Peace in Indonesia, and I was reading about a conflict between authorities in Indonesia and Malaysia. It was about which country owned a certain traditional dance. Should this be considered Indonesian culture or Malaysian culture? This was really relevant for tourism and international cultural projects, money, prestige, and so on. However, lately, the concept of cultural appropriation has come to become stuffed. It has become a piñata of all kinds of concepts that really doesn't fit together very well. Some of these concepts really need to be talked about. And I think that's the main reason why people keep talking about this new idea of cultural appropriation, in spite of being so absurd on the whole, and also including some stuff that are really creepy. When people talk about cultural appropriation today, sometimes it's in the sense I first learned about it. Sometimes it's about what I would perhaps call belittling representation, where you take a stereotype, a negative belittling stereotype, and use that. In public debate, people sometimes call that cultural appropriation. I think that's mislabeled, but they don't have any other word right now to talk about it, and they need to talk about it. So I guess a bad label is better than no label at all, so they at least can talk about it. And another rather unrelated problem is that when people from a stigmatized minority do something, they are often stigmatized for that as well. But then when people from the mainstream population do the same thing, they get credit for it. And this is a really annoying phenomenon. I don't think cultural appropriation is the right term to capture this problem, but again, we need to talk about it. And right now, cultural appropriation is the term people are using, and a label that lacks accuracy is perhaps better than having no label at all. So these two are things I think we really need to talk about. We just maybe need to make up a better word for it along the way. And then we have all the really creepy stuff about stigmatizing cultural exchange as such, and having these really essentialist ideas about cultures, even mixing up some race biology bullshit. I read some article on everyday feminism where they were actually making a race biology argument for why people of certain skin colors shouldn't wear certain haircuts or hairstyles or whatever. Like, excuse me, since when did feminism become in bed with race biology? What the fuck? That kind of bullshit is the main reason why I'm really skeptical to the concept of cultural appropriation as it's used today as a concept. But as I said, we still need to acknowledge that when people are talking about stuff under the label of cultural appropriation, they are talking about a lot of stuff that needs to be talked about. I do think that this is a piñata we need to smash, and smashing a piñata does not mean destroying something. It means destroying a shell so you can get to all the goodies inside, let them expand and grow. And that's what I've been trying to do all along when it comes to the concept of racism. Try to expand into this more nuanced categories model where we can actually pinpoint what is what. And I should probably do a little project of the same kind with the concept of cultural appropriation. It's not something I really have time to think very much about right now. If someone else do it before me, that's great. Sooner or later, someone need to make a rather extensive discourse analysis on the concept of cultural appropriation and try to clear out this mess and expand into more nuanced and functioning concepts for those things that people are talking about and really do need to talk about. So this is the basic thing about the Piñata effect, as I've just tried to explain using 2 examples. There are many more examples. You can probably think up a lot. And if you have ever encountered a concept where you felt that there's been much equivocation, that people are talking about different things as if it was the same thing because they only have one label for all of it, then start to also think about the Piñata effect. This thing that, maybe it's time for this bubble to burst. Not into non-existence, but into splitting up into different concepts that more accurately describe what you're trying to talk about. And that's all I have to say for now. Live long and prosper.